History is a battleground of stories, where every narrative is shaped by the voices that tell it and the listeners who interpret it. Across the centuries, people have fought not just with swords and shields, but with words, ideas, and beliefs that echo through time. And nowhere is this more evident than in Isaiah chapter 53, a passage that has sparked debate, devotion, and division for generations. Its words, inscribed on fragile parchment, have traveled across continents and centuries, carrying with them questions that remain unresolved. This passage, filled with haunting images of suffering and the hope of redemption, stands at the crossroads of Judaism and Christianity. Each faith approaches it with reverence, yet each claims a different truth, interpreting its meaning through the lens of their own history and experience. For Judaism, the suffering servant is not a single individual, but the nation of Israel itself, a collective symbol of endurance, pain, and ultimate redemption. Through centuries of exile, persecution, and hope, this interpretation has offered comfort and identity to a people often tested by history. For Christianity, however, Isaiah 53 is seen as a prophetic vision of Jesus Christ. Christians believe it foretells his suffering, death, and resurrection, making it a cornerstone of their faith and a powerful testament to the idea of salvation through sacrifice. The divide between these interpretations is not merely academic or theological. It shapes the very foundations of both religions. It influences how communities see themselves, their place in the world, and their relationship to the divine. For Christians, Isaiah 53 is a prophecy fulfilled, a sacred text that validates their beliefs. For Jews, it is a reflection of their national journey, a poetic account of collective suffering and hope for deliverance. The battle for Isaiah 53 is in many ways a battle for identity, memory, and the right to define one's own story. It is a struggle that continues to shape religious dialogue and cultural understanding to this day. To truly understand this enigmatic passage, we must look beyond inherited traditions and familiar interpretations. We must return to the ancient words themselves, examining them as they were first written in their original context and language. Let's peel back the layers of history, tradition, and belief, and see what the text of Isaiah 53 truly reveals about suffering, hope, and the enduring search for meaning. Christians see Isaiah 53 as a vivid prophecy of Jesus, aligning with the gospel accounts. Verses like, "He was pierced for our transgressions," are seen as direct references to the crucifixion. The servant's silence before accusers and the imagery of the lamb echo Jesus' trial and sacrifice. Details such as being assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death are linked to Jesus' burial. Christians view these specifics as prophetic proof, culminating in the servant's vindication, interpreted as Jesus' resurrection. For them, Isaiah 53 is a self-contained prophecy of the Christian gospel, hidden in the Jewish scriptures. But is this the only way to read the text? To solve the riddle of the suffering servant, we must look at Isaiah's own words. The book of Isaiah is a tapestry of poetry, prophecy, and history, woven together to address a people in crisis. Its language is rich with metaphor and layered meaning, demanding careful attention to context and continuity. Chapters 40 to 55, known as the Songs of the Servant, form a continuous prophecy of comfort for Israel in exile. These chapters were written during a time of profound upheaval, as the Jewish people faced displacement and uncertainty in Babylon. Isaiah's words offered hope, promising restoration and a return to their homeland. The servant is repeatedly and explicitly named Israel or Jacob. This identification is not hidden or ambiguous. It is stated openly, emphasizing the collective destiny and mission of the Jewish people. The servant's suffering and eventual vindication are tied to the nation's journey, not to a single unnamed individual. Reading Isaiah 53 in isolation is like entering a play at the final act, missing the established characters. Without the earlier chapters, the audience loses sight of the servant's true identity and the narrative arc that has been carefully constructed. Context is everything in understanding prophecy. The Christian view requires Isaiah to suddenly change the servant's identity without warning. A stretch, both literarily and historically. Such a shift would be out of character for a prophet so meticulous in his language and so consistent in his themes. Scholars and historians alike find this abrupt reinterpretation difficult to justify. The message was for the Jewish exiles, reminding them of their covenant and role as God's servant. Isaiah's words were meant to inspire resilience, faith, and a sense of purpose during a time of despair. The servant's suffering was a metaphor for the nation's trials, and the promise of redemption was collective. Before analyzing Isaiah 53, we must recognize the servant as Israel, as defined by the prophet himself. Only by acknowledging this can we appreciate the full depth and intent of Isaiah's message and avoid misreading the text through later interpretations. The evidence is in the text, not hidden in commentary. By reading Isaiah in its entirety, we uncover a story of national suffering, hope, and ultimate restoration, a message that has resonated with generations. The servant's identity is clear from the start. In Isaiah 41, God says, "But you, Israel, my servant Jacob, whom I have chosen." The servant is Israel, the descendants of Abraham. This sets the foundation for all servant passages. Israel is God's chosen instrument, even in exile. Their suffering is part of their journey, not a sign of rejection. The Christian argument requires ignoring this direct identification. The logical reading is that the servant remains Israel throughout. The story's hero is the collective nation, enduring hardship and witnessing God's power. Isaiah 42 describes the servant as blind and deaf, hardly traits of a sinless Messiah. This fits Israel, often chastised by prophets for spiritual blindness. The servant's flaws are acknowledged, yet so is their chosen status. In Isaiah 43, God says, "You are my witnesses, and my servant whom I have chosen." The servant's purpose is to bear witness to God among the nations. This dual identity, flawed yet chosen, matches Israel's historical experience. The Christian reading struggles with a servant described as sinful. The text points to a collective, imperfect people, not a perfect individual. Isaiah's servant is Israel, real, historical, and complex. Isaiah 44 continues the theme, "Jacob, my servant, Israel, whom I have chosen." The language is about national origins, God forming Israel in the womb. Jeshurun, another name for Israel, reinforces the collective identity. Later, God repeats, "You, Israel, are my servant, I will not forget you." The message is clear. Israel's suffering does not erase its purpose. The servant is not a new character, but the central protagonist of this prophecy. Isaiah insists his audience, exiled Israel, remember their identity. This context is essential for understanding the suffering described later. In chapter 45, even as God uses Cyrus the Great for Israel's liberation, the focus remains on Jacob my servant, Israel my chosen. The rise and fall of empires serve the redemption of Israel. The servant is the nation, not an individual. In chapter 48, the climax arrives. The Lord has redeemed his servant Jacob. The narrative arc from promise to liberation is about Israel. The servant's identity is consistent and explicit. To insert a Messiah here breaks the narrative thread. Isaiah's words leave no doubt. The servant is Israel. The story is one of national suffering and redemption. Chapter 49 opens with the servant declaring, "You are my servant Israel, in whom I will display my splendor." This is the servant naming himself Israel. Some argue the servant must be an individual, but the text describes a mission of internal renewal, Israel bringing itself back to God. The servant is the faithful remnant, tasked with reviving the nation and being a light to the Gentiles. The simplest reading is that the servant is Israel, personified. The mission is twofold: spiritual regeneration within Israel and being a beacon to the world. This is the Jewish understanding, Israel as God's servant, chosen for a difficult mission. The text confirms, not complicates, the servant's identity. When the debates fade and the noise of argument subsides, Isaiah's text remains our enduring guide, a voice echoing through centuries, offering wisdom and comfort to those who seek understanding. Read as a whole, chapters 40 through 55 reveal a profound truth. The suffering servant is Israel itself, named explicitly 9 times. This is not a hidden message, but a thread woven openly through the tapestry of Isaiah's words. The suffering described is not that of a single person, but of an entire nation. A collective pain shaped by exile, persecution, and centuries of misunderstanding. The Jewish people have carried this burden together, their story marked by resilience in the face of adversity. Yet over time, interpretations diverged. The Christian reading lifts chapter 53 out of its context, focusing on an individual and overlooking the explicit identifications and descriptions of the servant as flawed and human, qualities that mirror Israel's own struggles and imperfections. The Jewish perspective, however, flows naturally from the text. The servant's suffering is not a side note, but the very climax of Israel's national ordeal, a testament to the endurance and faith of a people who have never lost hope. Classical commentators, from ancient sages to modern scholars, saw their own history reflected in Isaiah's words. They recognized the echoes of exile, the longing for return, and the hope for redemption that have defined the Jewish experience. In the end, Isaiah promises that the nations of the world will come to recognize Israel's suffering was not a punishment for its own sins, but a witness to God's enduring power and purpose, a light shining in the darkness. Isaiah 53 is ultimately a message of hope to a broken people, assuring them that their suffering is not meaningless. It is a promise that pain can lead to healing, and that endurance will one day bring vindication. This is the story of the Jewish people's endurance, their ability to survive and thrive despite unimaginable hardship, and their ultimate vindication in the eyes of the world. The true meaning of Isaiah's vision lies in Israel's journey, a journey of suffering, faith, and ultimately triumph. Israel is God's servant, wounded, resilient, and destined to rise.